This is what we're gonna do today. So I said I was gonna do this ages ago. When I first went to the Erlbacher Kranken, I purchased this cone of Kevlar yarn, and it has been sitting in my yarn stash for years now. And I've been saying, I mean to do it, I'm going to do it, and then I needed a bit of a push to get it done. So this past week on our SweetGeorgia Show podcast, I had the chance to interview Celeste Angelo, and that is the person that I bought this Kevlar from in the first place. And so I kind of promised that by the time her episode goes live, which was this week, I would have a video showing that I made these Kevlar socks. So we are going to do this today. We are going to use this yarn. This is a Tough Love Sock from SweetGeorgia Yarns in the Atlantis colorway. It's kind of like a bluey purple kind of watery look. And then we are going to combine it with the Kevlar. This is a reinforcing yarn for heels and toes. You could probably use it through your entire foot, but I don't know that you necessarily need it for all of that. So we're going to just run it for just the heels and just the toes. And we'll see how this all works. So my main yarn is going to go here, and it is going to go through my yarn mast up here. I'm using an Erlbacher Speedster CSM, and so it has a yarn mast that has these two little holes up here. They're kind of close together, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread my yarn with this main yarn, and it's going to come through this part of the mast. All right, this is the part where it's going to feed into the yarn carrier. Now with the Kevlar yarn, I want to run it alongside, and I'm going to run it alongside just like how you would if you were using Lycra in your sock. So by comparison, this is a little cone of Lycra yarn that adds a little bit of stretch and all that stuff to your socks if you want to include this. Now, when you want to include your Lycra in with your main yarn, I add this additional piece of equipment to my yarn mast. This thing is called a Lycra bar. This one happens to be metal. I got this from the Yarn Mafia. You can find them online, Yarn Mafia. And but you can also 3D print these. If you have a 3D printer and you want to do something like that, you can get the instructions to print your own little yarn mast. All it is basically a bar with a hole in it so that it can be attached to your existing yarn mast and hold the Lycra or hold your carry-along yarn away from your main yarn so that they don't get tangled together. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to assemble my yarn mast and put this guy on, and then I'm going to run the Kevlar through here. And so what's going to happen is that the Kevlar yarn is going to go through this little black hole up here on the Lycra bar, and then it will go into this main part of the yarn mast, and then together the two yarns will be held together through the yarn carrier. So we're going to try and make a sock in this way. So to add my Lycra bar to the yarn mast here, it comes with a bunch of little rubber washers. And so the rubber washers are meant to protect your nice little paint job here on your CSM. So I'm going to pop that in there, and then I have my other rubber washer on the other end, and I'm going to basically sandwich all of that together and put this little thing back on. All right, so now we can take the little tag off of our Kevlar yarn and finally use this. And I'm going to take my end and I'm just going to feed it through the Lycra bar here, and I'm going to have this available for when I want to use it. All right, so as you know, we're not going to run our main yarn straight onto the machine. We have to actually cast on first. So I'm going to cast on with my favorite little cast on bonnet. And now I can add my main yarn. And I add my heel spring for the remainder of the sock. So I'm going to reset my counter. Okay, so I have cranked 30 rounds for the leg. That's actually a really, really short leg, but I'm hoping I can get 2 socks out of this cone. I've already made one big long sock. I'm wondering if I can squeeze out one more sock out of this, a little mini sock. So at this point in time, I am going to work my heel. So at this point, I want to add the Kevlar in for the heel. So I've just raised the back half of my sock, and I'm gonna, so at this point, I'm gonna add the Kevlar yarn, and you can see it's going through the little Lycra bar here, and I'm gonna take the yarn from here and also feed it in with the main yarn here. And I'm going to have them both go into the yarn carrier. So now we have lifted the first needle on the right side of our heel, and we're going to crank across. All right, and then we will lift the left needle. You can see I have the tail of my Kevlar hanging out here. And so what I want to do is I'm going to just kind of weave it in between all of these stitches that are still down, all of the needles that are still down, and it will kind of get woven into that section as I knit back across. So hopefully you can see the yarn is woven in there, kind of woven back and forth between those needles. And now I'm going to run my yarn back across the heel. I'm kind of holding down that tail. So as those stitches knit across, it basically takes that yarn tail that I wove back and forth and just kind of embeds it back into it. It's almost like if after you finish working your heel, you took a needle and you just took that yarn tail and you wove it back into the heel. So that's basically all we did, but it was just automatic. And now I'm going to raise again the next stitch on the side of the heel, and I'm also going to start to put my heel forks in. So we lifted that one and go across. And raise this one. All right, so we're done the first half of our heel. All right, so we're working the second half of the heel. Push down 2 stitches. And push down. Now just one at a time. All right, so we have finished the heel. Okay, I have my last stitch here that I'm going to knit in with the rest of the entire circumference of the sock. And so at this point, I need to stop the Kevlar, and I'm going to have the Kevlar yarn pop out right here. Okay, so I'm going to put all my needles back down into work, making sure all of the latches are open so that we don't drop any stitches. And then we'll crank forward. Okay, so let's cut the Kevlar here. Wow, it's hard to cut. That's not surprising. Okay, so I'm just going to watch, and then I'm going to pop my Kevlar yarn out right here at the corner where my halfway marks are. Okay, and I'll just tuck that inside the sock for now. Okay, so we're going to go all the way around. All right. So I've just moved my carrier to the back side of my sock. And so you can see here, there's the tail of my Kevlar. It's coming out to the halfway mark here. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to weave my yarn back and forth, this yarn tail back and forth around the needles. And so this is so that I don't have to get a needle out later on and weave those in manually. This is kind of going to happen automatically. So I'm going to go all the way around with my main yarn, holding the tail down and knitting across all of that. All right, so now we have basically reinforced our heel with the Kevlar, and we wove it in. We wove those tails in for the beginning and the end automatically. I'm going to reset my counter here and work my foot. So I normally crank 65 rows for a foot. All right, so that's 65. I'm stopping my yarn carrier again, right in between my halfway marks. So I'm going to lift up this back half so that we can work our toe now. So again, I'm going to run my yarn past here. All right, and then the last click, I'm going to take my Kevlar yarn here to reinforce the toes, and the same idea, running it with my main yarn, popping it in here, popping it into the yarn carrier here, just going to hold it down in the middle, and then making sure that I raise the first needle of my toe. It's ready to go. Now with my Kevlar yarn, I'm going to take this tail, and again, weave it in between these stitches that are still in work. I'm doing, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches. That should keep it nice and tidy. And then I'm just going to hold the tail in while I crank back around. But before I do that, I have to remember to raise the first needle on the left-hand side. Okay, holding down my yarn. All right, so that has effectively woven in my yarn tail, picking up that stitch, and I'm going to move my heel forks up now. I feel like this fabric feels a little bit extra thick. It's not really extra thick, it just feels a little bit extra thick. It needs a bit more support. There we go. All right, so now we're going to work the second half of our toe, pushing down 2 needles. I'm working quite slowly because I want to make sure that none of the stitches pop off at this point. That would be the worst. So that is the end of my second half of my toe. So as I come around, I'm going to add waste yarn into here, and all of these needles will have to go down. So as I'm going across, I'm going to cut my Kevlar yarn now. Because now I'm going to weave my tail in. So I can move that carry along yarn out of the way, and here is my little yarn tail for the Kevlar yarn. I don't need it anymore. And so now I have it on this side. I'm going to weave it across here. I'm going to hold that on the inside of the sock. Okay, and then I'm going to crank all the way around here. So I'm holding down my tail, cranking across. And before I go all the way across, okay, I'm going to put all of these needles down. Checking that all of the latches are open. This would be a terrible time to drop a stitch. Okay, and now I'm going to add my waste yarn. So that's the end of the sock yarn for the toe. And I'm going to leave a nice long tail so that I can graft the toe. There's not enough yarn to make a second sock. Here's my waste yarn. All right, that's it. All right, so I finished the sock. You can see it's still connected to my sock bonnet, but I'm going to take that off. You can see my very short 30 rounds of leg, and then you can see the heel with the little bit of Kevlar mixed in there. You can see there's a bit of a color difference. There's a color difference, but not very much. And it's just because I happen to choose two colors that were going to go together pretty well. Whatever color Kevlar, whatever color carry-on yarn you're using, it's going to create a little bit of an optical mixing effect with whatever color you're using for the main yarn. And so, yes, you can see that there is a visible color difference there, but it's not jarring because I just happened to pick two colors that work together pretty well. And then this is the foot. I did not include Kevlar all the length of the foot because I figure underneath your foot, you're not getting a lot of wear and tear. So I just kind of ignored that part of it. But then the toe, again, I added more of that Kevlar yarn for the toe. And there should be no yarn tails to weave in for the Kevlar part of it. All I need to do now is just graft the top of the foot and it will be ready to go. So I just have one sock. I'm gonna have a whole bunch of mismatched socks in my closet, but there you go. There's a sock that has been reinforced with the heels and toes with the Kevlar yarn. We'll see how this does, you know, like an actual wear test. I should knit another sock that is in this exact yarn with no Kevlar in the heels and toes, and then I'll wear them side by side and see how they do. See which one holds up a little bit better over time. So we'll check that out. But in the meantime, if you are curious about this Kevlar yarn, you can find it at Celeste's shop. It is the Cranky Spinster. I'll put a link down below for that. So if you want to find that and carry that along with your yarn, you're more than welcome to give that a try as well. The socks feel really substantial. They feel really solid. They do feel stronger in the heels and toes. And so I'm hoping that these will wear really well. So if you haven't heard me mention before, I'm actually going to be filming a class teaching how to knit a sock on the circular sock knitting machine from beginning to end. And that is going to come out this October for the School of Sweet Georgia. So if you're not yet a member of the School of Sweet Georgia, you can find us over there. The machine knitting classes are coming out this year on the school. And one of the classes is going to be working with your circular sock knitting machine, specifically this Erlbacher machine, because this is the one that I have. And I'm going to be showing you all of the ins and outs of how to use this from the very beginning to make a stockinette sock. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.